So, VK on the beat, check. I'm in Toronto where you wanna get the city love. I'm from Toronto where you wanna get the city love. I'm in Toronto like we wanna get the city love. My city love me back for my city love.
Welcome to episode 1187 of Toronto Mic'd, proudly brought to you by Great Lakes Brewery, a fiercely independent craft brewery who believes in supporting communities, good times, and brewing amazing beer. Order online for free local home delivery in the GTA. Palma Pasta. Enjoy the taste of fresh, homemade Italian pasta and entrees from Palma Pasta in Mississauga and Oakville. Electronic Products Recycling Association. Committing to our planet's future means properly recycling our electronics of the past. Ridley Funeral Home. Pillars of the community since 1921. Canna Cabana. The lowest prices on cannabis. Guaranteed. Learn more at cannacabana.com. And Sammy Cohn Real Estate. Ask Sammy any real estate questions at sammy.cohn@properlyhomes.ca. Joining me today, making his Toronto Mike debut, is Richard Griffin. Welcome, Richard.
Hey, Mike, that's quite an eclectic group of sponsors you got there. I love it.
Where do we begin? The weed, the beer, where does it all start?
The funeral
for us?
home.
The funeral home.
We're getting there. We're getting there.
Yeah. There's another voice in the room. I can't wait to let the world know that there is a very special co-host for this episode. So Richard Griffin making his Toronto Mike debut. And beside him in the TMDS studio, a man who is not making his Toronto Mike debut, Mark Hebscher, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And Hebsy, we just recorded a great episode of Hebsy on Sports.
I thought it was pretty good, too. We left some stuff open, though. We left some topics up for further discussion because of the timing of this, right? Because you released this show like right after we record it, which is like an hour after we
This will probably be in
Sports.
feeds by 1 p.m. today, which is Friday the 13th, by the way.
Oh.
Happy Friday the 13th. Richard, how do you know Hebsy? I mean, I know Hebsy. Everyone knows Hebsy. But when did you first meet Hebsy? Like, what? Give me the Hebsy Griff origin story.
Well, I was PR in Montreal, obviously. That's part of my story. But Hebsy worked for an FM station, and we did not look on we looked at FM stations like people look at bloggers right now and podcasters.
And podcasters, right.
But, so he, every year after year, would apply for a season credential, and I would battle within the Expos organization and say, the future is FM radio. How right was I or how wrong was I?
I don't know. Who are the executive? Who are we talking about? Are these names that people would know?
Perhaps.
All right. Come on.
You can rough them up.
Seriously, like, who were the resistors? Because I'm going through, I know it's like, I don't know if you're going to go to Expos games. Well, why would I take this job in Montreal if I couldn't cover the Expos?
Yeah, I think Bob Dunn was the moving force behind us getting it done. And once it did get done, I was proven right. And, FM radio. Of course, in Hawaii in the 82 winter meetings, I gave a lecture to the PR people about the magic of the fax machine. So, I mean, we've come a long way in technology, and that's one of my downfalls.
Yeah. Now, so when I went to Montreal, I was working in Toronto in radio, and I had done some Blue Jays games in '79 and was part of their broadcasts.
Right.
Until I got fired by the drunken, my boss at the time, who was like, hired on the cheap, and they didn't realize that he was an alcoholic, a womanizer, didn't know anything about news or anything like that, and had personal grudges against people and was an anti-Semite. But besides that, he was a good guy. And so I ended up in Montreal and working for FM 96, which was like CKFM was in Toronto, 99.9, right? And like Rich said, there's FM. You guys aren't like real journalists or anything like that. And so we had gone through the same thing trying to get Montreal Canadiens credentials. Like we could get them on a per game basis only.
Right.
You're not getting a full season credential. Who you, Red Fisher?
Right.
That kind of thing. And so it was really refreshing, first of all, to find someone who spoke English and was responsible only for the English-speaking media, right? Monique Giroux was responsible for the French-speaking media. So this was beautiful because Rich only had so many people that he, were in sort of that circle of here, you need to know?
Well, I think there was an overlap. I think we were responsible for both, but in terms of dealing with individuals and front office people at the stations or at the newspapers, it was Monique with the French, and
right.
But it was like group decisions at all times.
But you had,
and we just didn't like you at the time.
Okay,
they had good taste. Now listen, so Richard Griffin finally making his Toronto Mike debut. This is personally a thrill for me, Richard. I'm glad you're here. You are getting, and you too, Hebsy, because you made the trek too, and I appreciate that you're here as well. You're each getting a large meat lasagna from Palma Pasta. It's frozen. You're going to take it home with you and enjoy that.
Perfect.
That's tonight's dinner.
That's a nice dinner for
I already
Hebsy.
put it on the menu.
What time should we be there? It's delicious. Griff, you're going to love it.
We'll have enough for you for sure, Mike. You can drop by.
Lots of leftovers. And when I think about the Richard Griffin story, which we're going to cover over the next several hours, Richard, get comfortable. Just kidding, kind of. But there's like these three parts. Like, yeah, there's an Expos part. Then there's a Toronto Star part. And then there's a Toronto Blue Jays part. And this story might begin in Kingston, but I thought maybe right off the top you can answer the one question everybody's wondering. Let me look in the eyes there. Okay. Did you choose to retire from your job with the Toronto Blue Jays?
Not really. I mean, when they brought in Andrea Goldstein, who does a great job, and I love her because she loves baseball, when they brought her in directly from Rogers' front office, I sort of was looking for a different type of role. I knew there was going to be a different type of role, and we really didn't agree on what that should be. And so I'm not retired. I just stepped aside, and I'm going to try and figure out how to get a podcast so I can get a
well, Hebsy needs
funeral
another.
home.
Wait, hang on a second. I have to follow.
Yeah, of course.
So tell us now, Rich. So Andrea, who did she replace, or what is her position within the ball club vis-a-vis Rogers? How does that work?
Well, I don't want to dig too deep on this, but when I got hired in 2019, I was there 4 seasons. When I got hired, I was working directly for Ross Atkins, and they had gone through job search, executive search, and so I was one of like 12 or 13 people that were interviewed. Got that job working for Ross Atkins, and there was more that relied on working in marketing, and for Marnie Starkman, when Marnie made that Buffalo experiment a success, and she became more of a force within the Blue Jays organization. And so when they brought Andrea in, she reported to Marnie, and a lot of the stuff that I had been doing in an overlap situation with Adam and Rodney then went into her jurisdiction.
Right. So roles are not nearly as clearly defined as we might think. You know, you hear Ross Atkins, general manager, in charge of this. Rich Griffin, in charge of this. When Howard Starkman, who was the original PR director of the Blue Jays, Marnie's father, when he was there, he was the PR director, and then he was vice president in charge of communications, and you added roles to him, and he had assistants and that type of thing. So I guess the role evolved. You've seen it from the beginning. When you were with the Expos from very young, how the role of press liaison, PR director, whatever you want to call it, has evolved, or in some cases has devolved, right?
Yeah, and the thing that struck me the most when I went to the Blue Jays finally after 24 years at the Star was the difference between the organization in Montreal, where we had, I think, 48 people total, including ticket office, and got to the Blue Jays, and there was like 200 people, and everything was decentralized. There was more specialization, and in Montreal, it was great because broadcasting, we all met together and decided things, and it affected the direction of the organization, the future of the organization. So you were part of all those decisions, no matter what department you were heading. And, we had a Christmas party in the clubhouse in December, and I looked around, and there had to be 300 people there.
Just for the Blue Jays?
Yeah.
300 people?
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, we got 12 parking specialists.
What?
It's a growth industry.
Yeah. But no, that's the big difference, is the scope and size of it. And in 2019, when I was hired, it was a week before spring training, and I went down to spring training and was thrown into the deep end of the pool and sort of 2020, of course, 2020 and 21 were COVID years, where Zoom and high tech became the thing.
Right.
And that's not my specialty. You know that, Hebscher.
But at the same time, too, what it did was it took away a key element that the press had always had with the players and management, and sort of made it easy, I guess, for management and the players to say, we can keep our distance from the media and they can still do their job. And at the same time say, let's create our own content within the Blue Jays organization with the help of Major League Baseball, with all this, and let's create our own narratives instead of waiting for the reporters to ask the questions and get the depth stuff. So how quickly did that happen, and how much did COVID have to do with the separation between
accelerator
media and
I think it sped up the process. I think it was headed in that direction.
It was headed that way for sure.
And the social media department of the Blue Jays is tremendous. It's one of the best in all of baseball.
Really good.
And fans in Canada and in Toronto, and Blue Jays fans and sports fans use social media in Canada and Toronto more than any other, because we're more intelligent than most fan bases. There's no
we're
question
advanced
about
people,
it.
absolutely.
And so it just sped up the process. But to your point earlier, my specialty and what I love doing is interacting in the clubhouse with the players, looking them in the eye and saying, hey, can you do this? Can you talk to these people? It's good. I know he's FM, but what the hell? Let's do it.
We could maybe more people will go to Expos games that listen to FM radio.
Hey, no static at all.
But yeah, great. That should have been the tagline. No static at all.
Yeah. But I think the Steely Dan movie it had come out by then. Yeah, no static.
Okay,
FM,
so because I want to go back to Jamaica and then get this full story. Fascinating career you've had, and it's not over yet. We just found out you were, because it's spun in some circles as Richard Griffin retires, and when people retire, typically it's like, okay, I've had enough. I'm gonna hand in my badge and go I don't know, work on the farm or something. But you're not retired. You're just no longer with the Blue Jays.
Yeah, I have not had enough. I won't have enough till I use that sponsor of yours, the funeral home.
Which one? Okay, hopefully not for a long time.
But yeah, no, I plan on finding something around baseball. It's 50 years in the game, and it's kind of hard to.
Bob Elliott needs writers, right? You going to write for Canadian baseball there with Bob Elliott?
I used to be, when Bob was covering for the Ottawa Citizen and he worked in the press box in Montreal.
Yeah.
I was good friends with him. He came to Toronto. I was good friends with him. I came to work for the Star. I wasn't such good friends with him. and then at a certain point in time, we became great friends again. But I think I would rather find a route of my own and find something that's either existing or that I start.
Okay, love it. So this is already breaking news here in Toronto, Mike. We got it straight from the horse's mouth here. Richard Griffin tells us you didn't want to leave the Jays, but it wasn't working out, and you are on the outside, and you're looking for something, a new challenge, so we can have a fourth chapter to this story. And then you'll have to come back and complete the story.
No doubt.
Okay, awesome. Do you drink beer, Richard?
Yes.
Okay. Can I, Mike?
Yeah.
Before you go into that, can I just have to do this aside because it's going to get lost somewhere. When you at first asked Richard, how did he and I first meet?
Yeah.
We really didn't the whole story wasn't all there. Right, I'm a aspiring FM radio broadcaster. Rich is a young, and we're both single in Montreal. Kind of.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you said in Montreal.
In Montreal, we're both, and I'm new, that kind of thing. And so, I'm dating, and I go out with this, lovely young lady for lunch named Debbie. Very, very nice.
Okay.
We have a nice lunch and all that. And then, I kind of forget what the rest happened was. I had either called her for another date or something, or Rich ran into me at the press box and it was like, I'm going out with her now, or something like that.
Wow.
And I went, oh, yeah, no, great. That's terrific. And so I don't recall. I just remember the funny thing was kind of like, oh yeah, hi, and I would see him like, how's it going with Debbie? Oh, it's going great with Debbie. And then years later,
Richard gets a chance.
And then years later, it's like, oh, okay, well, yeah, they've been together for 42 years.
I just know that when I was coaching baseball in Oakville and my son was catching, The other catcher, his mom also went to lunch with Hebscher. So
There you go.
so Hebscher gets around.
There you go.
That's all I can
Right.
say.
Only with ball players and their families. So that was pretty.
Oh,
so
that's
that was
great.
just pretty.
I'm
funny.
glad you chimed
that was
in with
pretty
that.
funny. Yeah, that was. It was a.
No.
It was a kind of
Listen.
an interesting kind of connection.
Interrupt me anytime, Hebscher.
And remember last year, and I told you that I was calling Rich to try to get credentials.
I saw a Twitter
And
photo
I-
of you trying to
and I
get into
couldn't
the
get
spring
in.
training
I couldn't
facility.
Get in. I couldn't even
Okay.
get to see. I couldn't even get to see Rich.
Right.
He hadn't gotten down there yet because of the COVID thing, and I was already down there.
Right.
And I just remember going up to the gates, going, "Do you know who I used to be?" to one of the guys.
I used to be Hebscher.
hoping somebody would recognize me. Going, "Yeah." I
So
remember."
Richard, right off the top, again, we're going back and we're gonna obviously this
so
won't be
funny.
it. But when Mark Hebscher, formerly of Sportsline, a legend in this marketplace for sports coverage, still hosts Hebscher on Sports. What a wonderful sports podcast that is. But when he's knocking at the door in the spring training facility in Dunedin, Florida, can't you just send a text and they put that lanyard around Hebscher's neck and he's got full reign there? Like, what happened there? Hebscher doesn't get in anymore.
Well, if I was there, I bring him in and we stand in the parking lot where we can talk. But he doesn't get in the clubhouse. He doesn't get on the field. He doesn't get to shake hands with the players. Who knows where he's been? You know?
And I'm not mainstream media.
His
You
reputation
can't-
precedes
I'm
him.
not mainstream media. And this
Well, what does that
isn't
mean anymore?
This isn't Montreal 1980 FM versus AM. This is a whole different. It's not like FM. Well, we don't let you. This is no. We have to draw a line between mainstream media and non-mainstream media, and we have our own people.
Those lines
as
are
well.
so blurry now, though.
Yeah, but there's so many talented and intelligent and smart baseball podcasters that we got to draw the line somewhere. And
Just below
don't
Hebscher,
let-
just above
oh, come on.
Hebscher.
yeah, right. It's like the Mendoza line.
Yeah, you don't let podcasters.
If you're
There's
below
no podcasters
Hebscher,
only.
you don't
allowed.
get in.
All right. To finish the beer thought real quick is that there's a wonderful independent craft brewery here in Southern Etobicoke, but you can find their beer throughout the province. Great Lakes Brewery has sent over some fresh craft beer for you, Richard, so you're bringing that home with you.
I drink that quite often at the pint right next to the ballpark.
What's your favorite Great Lakes beer?
The lager,
Is it
The IPA.
is it the premium lager that I'm holding?
No,
Or is
that's
it
too expensive.
Oh,
the
this is
666?
good. No,
I will try it.
This
though.
is
Okay, I'll
actually-
get you
this
some
is actually
lager.
very
Yeah.
Okay. They have a devil's. Yeah, I'll get some lagers. You'll get some Canuck as well. That's they're kind of their staple, the pale ale. But you're getting some fresh craft beer from Great Lakes. I mentioned the lasagna from Palma Pasta. We've already shouted out Ridley Funeral Home. Now let's go back to. I was gonna do the Canna Cabana shout out before I took us to
it.
Kingston, Jamaica, because they will not be undersold on cannabis or cannabis accessories. Over 140 locations across the country. Shout out to Canna Cabana. That's where Hebscher gets his weed. Now, Richard Griffin, take us back. I think this is a surprise to some people. You were born and raised in Jamaica.
Yeah, that's one of the things that Bob Elliott loves to tell people is that we're both Kingston boys. You know?
Wait a second. He's from Trenchtown?
So my dad moved to post-war. He was from Winnipeg and he went to Queen's University. And he graduated in chemical engineering. He went to work for Seagram's, and after the war, World War II, they decided they needed to open up Captain Morgan, and they needed a young volunteer to go down there into a third world nation and run the sugar estate. And that was my dad.
Wow.
And so we have 5 children who were all born in Jamaica. I grew up going to convents. I was one of the 10 young boys and one of the 3 young white boys, and I always wondered why I came last in the 100-meter dash. but it was quite an experience. The night before we flew to Montreal in 1963 after Jamaica became independent and nationalized all the industries. The night or the morning of the flight, I went out on a catamaran with some deep sea fishermen by myself at 5 a.m, came back and went and woke my mom up and she said, where you been? I said, we went out fishing. Which parenting has changed, I found out, since I have 4 of my own. But that would not happen these days.
no
But it was a great experience. We used to watch, we didn't watch anything because there was no television growing up. So we would listen to FM radio. We would listen to shortwave radio of
Sure.
the World Series, and it was always the Yankees. Became a Yankee fan.
Right.
Became a baseball fan, even though I'd never seen a game. And
That's
the rest is
interesting.
history,
I was
yeah.
going to ask you, like, was it your move to Montreal when you discovered baseball, or did you discover baseball while you were living in Jamaica? But it sounds like you're listening to these World Series games on the shortwave and falling in love.
Yeah, my dad was, when he was going to Queens after he graduated from Queens, he went to Montreal, and he remembers going to games with Jackie Robinson there, and he was a huge baseball fan. And so that sort of, he passed that along. It was him and me and my brother sitting in front of the shortwave radio listening to, we listened to John Glenn's Circle the Globe. I watched the Cuban Missile Crisis unfold off my backyard. It was great.
What kind of music did you listen to?
We listened to, well, at the time, Calypso. Reggae hadn't really come in. It was coming into form just as we were leaving. But it was Harry Belafonte. All my kids know those songs.
No North American or American radio? Did you ever get?
No, we got, I thought the Alamo was a fresh release in 1963 with John Wayne, but it was like 58 or something. So.
Wow. Because when I was in Jamaica, I was in
it's
Jamaica.
changed since you were
No,
in
but
Jamaica.
no. I'm saying when I was first in Jamaica in 1979, the cab driver was playing Kenny Rogers. Right?
Right.
Or, no, it was 81, sorry.
Okay.
And so, and I asked him about country music, and he said that they got a station from Texas. This was in the 70s.
Sure.
That they could pick up on shortwave or whatever it was. And a lot of people were listening to it, sort of like the British invasion, where they couldn't hear the American music unless they got the records from the seamen.
Right. Or
And
the,
so this guy was
pirate
telling
radio.
me how there's an area maybe, or a lot of people in Jamaica that listen to country music, which I just found to be.
Yeah, and once a week in the Daily Gleaner, they would run a top 50 songs, and most of them were North American, but most of them were like 2 or 3 years old.
That's funny.
So tell me, Richard, how do you get hired by the Expos? Like when and how does that happen?
Well, I don't know if you guys, you probably know Nifty Neiman, Jeff
I
Neiman.
do. Yep.
And he passed away in 2019, but he had the job as an intern, and I was failing at Concordia University. I was dropping out, loved baseball, went and applied for a summer job, and Nifty Neiman had just told him he quit, so I got that job. And then after 1 year of interning, doing stats, doing game notes, they hired me full-time in 74. And I just remember the little office I had. It had a ceiling like this in your studio.
That's a low ceiling.
Yeah. And I just remember being a 20-year-old kid and working on press guide biographies in December or whatever it is. And all of a sudden I look and Willie Davis is standing there in a full-length mink coat.
Wow, Willie Davis.
And I'm going, oh, I'm in the big leagues now.
The coolest.
But they liked the game notes that I wrote. They liked the press guide biographies that I wrote.
Yeah.
One of the big turning points was they had the PETA people, or their version at the time, because we had Farm Day, and Pepe Frias always chased the grease pig. And the grease pig on the way down from St. Hyacinthe passed away. It was an enclosed cube van, and there were no windows. There was no, and pigs don't sweat. So
it's terrible.
Yeah, people came in just to see Pepe Frias chase the grease pig, and we had no grease pig.
Oh,
And so in the game notes, I put that he pulled a hamstring.
that's very good. Actually.
And they liked that. I got them off the hook with the animal cruelty people, and the rest is history.
Okay.
The writers, Mike, in those days, especially the writers who followed the team every day,
Yeah.
were especially, good press notes really helped the writers a lot, right? Well-written press notes, like Rich was famous for, just made the job, like as broadcasters do, you could kind of glance going, oh, here's a little line, and like great little quips and perfect for filling time and filling space in your columns and all that. And so, and Howie Starkman had them in Toronto, and, depending on where you went, some were better than others. Rich was famous, though, for, it's like, okay, what do we got in the press notes today? It was good.
Oh, I love it. I love that stuff.
The key is
Pre-internet universe.
The key is being truthful, but presenting it in a way that
presenting it in such a way that it's more interesting than, for example, now it's like so-and-so in his last 7 games is 7 for 23 and blah, 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 blah. First time since, Tuesday night. Like really stats that make no sense versus something that's got some, like, oh, that's a good one.
I have a little audio for you because I have a fantastic question that came in from FOTM Leslie Taylor. Leslie, hello. I've met Leslie at a few TMLX events. Hebsy's been to a few. Maybe he's been to one with Leslie. But Leslie's question is, and I have a little clip of her dad because it's about her dad. What are Richard Griffin's memories of working with my dad? Now, Leslie's dad is this individual. Let's listen for a few seconds.
1-1 pitch on the way. Swung on, sharp grounder. Wills has it, bobbles it, throw to first, in time! He did it! A no-hitter! A no-hitter! A no-hitter for Bill Stoneman!
Russ Taylor.
Russ Taylor was one of my favorite people early on with the Expos when I got there. He worked with Dave Van Horn, who's another one of my favorite people and still is. Russ, of course, was helpful in keeping the franchise alive in Montreal because he pinpointed Jerry Park as a possible location, even though it wasn't quite Major League caliber.
Right.
Although it was, because a Major League team played there and fans really took to it. Yeah. But Russ Taylor was, he was a classy man who was also, in addition to working in the radio booth, was also broadcast director at the time. So I had dealings with him. He showed me the ropes. He told me what to do, what not to do. That didn't include beer at all. but he was a wonderful, and there are so many stories of the first couple of years on the road with the. I wasn't traveling yet. I didn't get there till 1973. But early on, the traveling group with Dave and Russ and the Ted Blackman and there was a group, John Paul Sarot. There was a group that did nothing but party on the road, and some of the stories are epic. So when I got there, it was at the tail end of that party time. I tried to reinvigorate it, but some of the stories with Russ and Dave and the travel group at that time, I don't think the rest of North America, the rest of Major League Baseball, the rest of the National League knew what hit them until the Expos group came into town. But Russ was a great guy, one of my favorites. He's still on the ballot. I'm not supposed to say it, but he's still on the ballot for the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame every year.
That's the second part of Leslie's question. What would it take to get her dad, into the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame?
He's still on the ballot, and I keep campaigning for him. But I think that it's the same problem that Jacques Doucette has getting into Cooperstown, is that as the Expos recede into history, there's more of a look for current candidates. But as long as Russ is on the ballot, as long as Russ's candidacy stays alive, I'll keep being a proponent for it. He's deserving of it, because without him pinpointing Jerry Park, the Expos would have failed and the Blue Jays would not have existed.
Right. No, thank you. And Leslie's going to appreciate those kind words about her dad.
Hey, Leslie, I used to listen in Oshawa. There's a station, CKAR, so 1350. Really weak signal out of Oshawa. But they carried the Expos games before the Blue Jays, way before the Blue Jays. If I'm not mistaken, the second season, so 1970, I think. And I remember listening to those games. And man, the signal would fade in and out, and my brother and I, we would drive the car to a certain, like, Warden in Ellesmere or whatever. You could get the signal at the top of the hill there in the evenings. It was very difficult, but and the Expos games were only on once a week back in those days on the CBC. You'd get 20 games a year, not nearly enough.
Right.
And I love that team, man. I love that team. When I first went to Montreal, I wanted to meet all these guys. And Ron Hunt, that's Ron Hunt.
And Hebsy, CKAR was AM, so we gave them credentials.
You did not. There
Lots
was no
of static
They didn't
there.
even have a sports person. There was no seat in the press box for them.
All right, now, Richard, this is a good opportunity. We just talked about Russ Taylor, but you were also a radio broadcaster for a period of time, right? When Dave Van Horn moved to television?
Yeah, those were the days when there was either once a week or twice a week, every Wednesday and then every Saturday or Sunday, once on the weekend. So it was only twice a week, but Dave...
But Radio Canada had a different schedule. There were a bunch of games that were on Radio Canada we'd watch on Channel 25 in Toronto.
Right. It's
That-
like 12 or 13. Or whatever. Yes, I remember.
Please,
Yeah, right.
décision, please. Or my favorite, le mauvais lanceur. So that was another thing, was when you go to Montreal and watch a ball game, it's a totally different animal. You're getting it in both languages and expressions that are just, whoa, that's just...
And balle papillon is a knuckleball, butterfly ball.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, it was great.
But yeah, that was so twice a week. So it was about 30 games a year. I'd do radio with Ron Roosh and Rob Falls and Elliot Price.
Those two gentlemen are both FOTMs like yourself,
I
Richard.
played golf with Price down in
Oh
Fort,
yeah,
down
yeah,
in Fort
yeah.
Colborne
No,
this
he's
past
crazy
summer.
about golf. Yeah,
Yeah.
Not that good,
He's just
but-
crazy. He's crazy, period. Yeah. He's in BC now.
Yeah, he moved to BC.
He moved to BC.
Shout out to Elliot Price, FOTM Elliot Price. I realize I gotta get Richard to Toronto, but I still have more here. For example, here's a name that Hebsy knows because we had fun with him this morning on Hebsy on Sports. But Brian Gerstein writes in. Brian's from Montreal, and he writes in, I can't wait for you to talk about producing these gems. And then there's a picture of all these Expos guides. He says he lost his, I think he lost his 1993 one, and then he said there's no 94, or the 94 one was his last one for obvious reasons. But could you share some insight for Brian about maybe producing the Expos guides that he loved?
Yeah, the guides, I mean, that was primitive production there. It was, you'd still go in and have the little what do you call it, where you carve the letters out and replace them if there's a mistake.
Template.
Whatever
they call it.
It was a long production, but the covers were always a pride and joy because we tried to keep players off the cover and just make them baseball themes, and they were beautifully... an artist would produce, and we would choose between 4 or 5.
Yeah.
And then finally, I think there's a couple that have players on the cover. One of them, Gary Carter, was on the cover, and I gave it to his son at his funeral reception when I went over there. When his wife held the funeral reception for it, and he appreciated it. It was a beautiful cover tribute to Gary. And 82, we had players on the cover because we wanted them voted to the All-Star game, and we made sure of that by using a hole punch where you could see
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. And they did. How many, like 6 starters?
Through 1,000 Gary Carter. We just punched them and then drove them down in a cube
Stuff
band.
the ballot box.
That was great. But wait a second, how many starters in the 82 game? I was there. How many
4 or
Expo
5.
starters?
Well, the pitcher wasn't voted, but I
No,
think
the pitcher wasn't.
Steve Rogers started that game.
Yeah, that's right.
And Dave Steve started that game, right?
No, he was the year after in
Oh, he's
San
the year
Francisco,
after.
I
Okay, my
think.
apologies.
Yeah, that was at Comiskey.
Comiskey the year
Right.
after.
That was the game.
I remember I just
Hammaker
listened to
gave
his
up a
games on the
grand
radio.
slam home
Right.
run.
But yeah, no, it was those press guides were our pride and joy, and like Hebsy said, we would always try and put some, because it was broadcasters especially who used the media guides. You know, they come and you're there for the 3-game series, so they look through it, and after a couple of years, they read every word of every biography in the Expos guide because they wanted to see what was in there that they might have missed, and that's the only thing you wanted is for people to read it. You know, you can have a beautiful cover, which they all did, but you want people to use it, and broadcasters especially were reliant on it.
Yeah, completely reliant on it. There were 2 things. There was the team media guide, and there was the American League Red Book or the National League Green Book.
Wow.
Which had more league details and rules and stuff like that, whereas the individual team could go crazy. And then, remember, those media guides went from being, like a couple inches thick to like really thick and different. Well, no, they were all the same shape because they had to fit into those slots, right? They had to be that.
Ours were thicker because you had French and English.
Yeah.
And it was a problem because one of the early biographies was Sleepy Joe Gilbert, a young black kid from Texas, and he always had a toothpick like UL Washington, always played with a toothpick in his mouth. And so in his hobbies, I wrote, loves pool. And Monique translated it as to natation, that he loves swimming. So they would all go ask him about swimming. Yeah, you're a black kid from Jasper,
billiard.
Texas.
Yeah, billiard. Man.
Instead of le billiard or whatever. Yeah, that's good.
great.
That's funny. That's funny.
So he said, why are you asking me about swimming?
That's funny. There's on Twitter, DM Fox is the handle. DM Fox says, first off, Richard, congratulations on a wonderful career. Well, we just learned the career's not over yet. Okay, there's going to be another chapter in this career. But the second thing from DM Fox, he would love to know your favorite Bill Lee story.
Bill Lee's story is the one where he claimed.
I know the one where he's jogging,
hit by a cab. Yeah. And I had him at a function, and that's the thing about going and we had a Q&A session, Bill and myself, and I had more behind the scenes than he knew. So, like, my favorite Bill Lee is that he fell out of the second floor window onto a wrought iron spiked fence.
Oh my God!
That's impaled himself.
Because the husband came home, and he got up and hailed a cab, went to the hospital, and he showed up and he had athlete's thighs, and it was like purple from the hip to the knee, and he missed one start. Oh. And he went back out and he kept throwing his slop up there. And every day after those games, he would, go to the shower and you go, how the hell is this guy pitching like this? And that showed me a couple of things about Bill Lee.
1980? Was that 1980?
That was in Yeah.
Yeah. And here's why. Because that was the year of like the cocaine. All the guys were like, everyone was doing cocaine.
We hear about Tim Raines. You see,
I was in Montreal. That was my first, and it was like, what? It was very different from Toronto.
Head first slide, right? Because the glass vial.
Well, that was part of it. I don't know if that was that year, but there, first of all, you had Ron LaFleur was on that team, and he was a bad guy. He was not a.
I like Ron LaFleur. He wasn't a great guy, but I like Ron LaFleur.
I liked him too.
I like Rodney Scott.
They were good, nice guys. They were good guys. It's just they were. What's the word? I don't know. Not good influences necessarily on some of the other people. But hey, listen.
Some guys go to Penn. Ron LaFleur was in the Penn. So, I don't know what you expect,
Yeah.
I can't get you to Toronto. You're still in Montreal. I have to play a couple of clips. And I'm sorry, Expos fans, but we're just going to get a taste of this one.
Now in the stretch. Here's the 3-1 pitch, and it's swung on, fly ball, center field. Dawson going back onto the warning track. Dawson at the wall. That ball is a home run. That ball is out of here, and a home run for Rick Monday, and the Dodger bench clears to congratulate Rick Monday, who has hit a 2-out home run here in the 9th inning, and it appeared that Andre Dawson had room as he went back to the fence, and he just flat ran out of room as the ball cleared the fence at about the 385 mark.
Well, as we mentioned, Ron, Rick Monday, a fastball hitter in that situation. Steve had to come in with a fastball. He hit it hard. He hit it to center field, the deepest part of the field. Andre went back on it. Thought he had a chance, but it just cleared the fence.
A 9th inning home run. And the Dodgers have gone ahead 2-1.
1981 NLCS. Game 5, is that right? Anyway, that's the Rick Monday home run. Might be the biggest moment in Expos history.
Ron
sadly.
Roosh and Tommy Hutton on the call.
Yeah.
So we would have not heard that. We would have heard that. That was the local radio call.
Yeah.
Wow, man.
So you were there, Richard. Were you there at this time, Hebsy, 81?
No, I was watching. We had a big poker game. Was that on a holiday?
No, I was on a Monday, obviously.
Right, but was it a holiday Monday or part of a holiday weekend?
No, it was just rained out on Sunday. Or
there you go. Okay.
Iced out on Sunday.
Iced out.
Yeah,
and,
okay, there you
played
go.
on Monday. So.
No, listen, that was just, it brought us to our knees.
If it's too painful, I can move on, but I do have a happier clip I'll play next. But any, I don't know, thoughts, recollections?
Yeah, that was, it took me 8 years before I would even say hello to Rick Monday. Even when he was a broadcaster, I wouldn't even acknowledge him or shake his hand. But one thing that came out of that is, I'm shallow.
Wow, Richard Griffin.
We're shallow.
One thing that came out of that, we lost that game, and there was a guy who had dementia from New York named Israel Shapiro, and he was a huge fan of Duke Snider. So he would follow us around. He would go to spring training. He would go to New York. And for some reason, he was able to come to Montreal. His sister got him a Greyhound bus pass so she could get him out of her hair. And so he took the bus to Montreal for that, and he came to the press box. and he had marks on his head from police batons. Like he had full on dementia, but he was like a huge baseball fan. He went to Ebbets Field in Brooklyn, and he became a Duke Snider fan. So we'd go to New York, and he'd go in the Grand Hyatt, and he'd come swinging through with a security guy on his arm, pushing him out onto the street again. Anyway, the story is that Debbie, who Hebscher and I both know. The game was wrapped up, and we were going downstairs to the post-game party, and Israel was in the little foyer of the press box, and it was freezing. It was below zero, below 32 at the time. And I said, Israel, what are you doing here? And he said, I have $10. I got to give Peter Durso, the traveling secretary, he lent me. I said, okay, give me the $10. I'll give it to Peter. I said, you have no socks on. He had running shoes. He had Converse with holes in the toe. Right. So I said, here. And I stopped and took my shoes off, took my socks off, gave him my socks. He put the socks on. And this apparently impressed Debbie so much that she married me.
That's great.
Amazing.
But wait a second. Pete Durso was the traveling secretary in
81.
Was he there in 80 also?
Yeah.
Because I knew him when he was with the Blue Jays. He had been with the Jays the years before that.
Yeah, he replaced Gene Kirby.
Right.
Yeah.
And his dad, Joe, was a top sports writer, right?
Joe Durso at the New York Times.
New York Times, yeah. Oh, my God. I hadn't heard that. The first few years of the Blue Jays, Mike, there was a place, it was called the Polish Press Box. I feel bad about that. But what had happened was when they built the stadium for baseball, they mistakenly put in plexiglass in what should have been an open stadium, an open box, so that the TV broadcasters would broadcast from there. But they mistakenly put plexiglass, which rendered it useless for any broadcaster because it's all concrete and glass and the echo. So they labeled it the Polish Press Box. Well, what happened was it ended up being a place where all these Blue Jay executives or lesser employees could, during the game, kind of go in and have a beer or whatever they wanted to do, or shoot the shit about the game. And Joe Durso would come in, Elliot Wally would come in, Pat Gillick would come in. Wow. Everybody would, Tom Cheek would come in between innings if he wasn't doing games. And it ended up being this sort of, I don't know, like a Friars Club almost of baseball people. And Joe and Pete Durso told the best stories in a New York accent that I had never heard before. I had never heard this accent, but rat-tat-tat-tat type of talking. Anyway, sorry to interrupt.
All right, last clip. Then we're getting, I promise you, Richard's coming to Toronto. We got to get him to Toronto. So last clip, because I just don't want to end it with the Rick Monday. Just one more.
In the bottom of the ninth. 26 in a row have been retired by Dennis Martinez. One and two pitch. In the air, center field, Grissom, El Presidente, El Perfecto.
I'll break it down. Richard, maybe happier memories, maybe.
Yeah, I appreciate, Mike, that you end on a more positive note. Although getting married because of Rick Monday is...
that's called making lemonade out of lemon.
Right. But the Dennis Martinez was great because, on the Friday, Mark Gardner had thrown 9 no-hit innings and had given up a run in the 10th and lost the game. So twice in 3 days, the Dodgers had been no-hit for 9 innings. And some great trivia came out of there. Of course, Ron Hassey catching both games, the 2 previous perfect games. Two perfect games. First catcher to catch 2 perfect games. Chris Gwynn was the last out of Dennis's perfect game, was the last out of Tom Browning's perfect game. So he was the last out of 2 consecutive perfect games.
Wow.
We flew from Los Angeles. Oh, and the video after the game on the field that you can get on YouTube after Dave Van Horn's great call of El Presidente, El Perfecto. That video ends with me in a crowd of trying to grab Dennis, and all 4 of my kids and both my grandkids look at it and I go, oh, there's Dad, there's Grandpa. You know?
Love it.
So
I can see the video. I can see it. There's like, by the way, Dennis, we might need you for a few comments after your birthday kind of thing, right?
So the next morning at 4:30 in the morning, the Today Show with Brian Gumbel we flew to San Francisco for the series. It was last game of the Dodgers series. And so I said, Dennis, can you go on at 4:30 in the morning? And he's a reformed alcoholic, and I'm not. So he said, yeah, no problem. And he had a Nicaraguan broadcast friend with the Giants, and they went out and talked about, he was still on a high from that perfect game.
Sure.
So I went out with Elliot Price, and we got back to the lobby at 4:30 in the morning. And where's Dennis? And he was like in his shirt and tie and jacket ready for Brian Gumbel. And I went, how the hell did he do that? But that was a memory that's lasted a long time. Plus, when I went as a writer in Cleveland, Dennis had gone to Cleveland. It was my first trip to Cleveland as a writer. And I saw him on the field. I said, Dennis, you want to go for a beer after? And he went, yeah, I'm not going to have a beer, but I'll sit with you.
Right.
So we went to the hotel bar, the Key Marriott, where the team was staying, and I had just finished writing a column. I slid in next to Dennis at the bar, and on TV is Pedro Martinez throwing a perfect game in San Diego. I said, Dennis, this is unbelievable. Pedro is throwing a perfect game. I'm sitting next to Dennis Martinez, who threw a perfect game, and he looked at me. Hey, those two women over there are pretty hot. I went, oh, okay.
I can see where your mind's
Yeah.
All right. I don't have to remind people what happens in 1994. I did give the Blue Jays that extra year of being defending champion, by the way. But the Expos had a great freaking season, and although the Yankees were pretty good too. But bottom line is, we all know what happens in 94. So let me ask you straight out, why do you end up leaving the Expos organization and coming to Toronto and becoming the Toronto Stars baseball columnist?
There were a few reasons for it, and they all pretty much involved work in the future of the Expos as we saw it. I mean, everyone internally knew that once the strike was settled or when they played, especially after the season was canceled, that it was all going to change, and it did almost immediately. But Claude Brochu at the time was the president, and he had laid off the traveling secretary, and I was going to do traveling secretary. He had laid off broadcaster. I was going to do broadcast. I already had a post-game show. I had PR, and he wasn't going to give me any more money, and especially the radio gig. I knew that if I didn't get any more money, I was taking some professional's job away from him, like Elliot Price wanted it, and a few other people wanted it,
Right.
And I just didn't think that was right. And so Dave Perkins called me from the Star, and he was a sports editor. He had been the columnist. He knew my game notes from the two World Series in 92, 93, and he thought they were pretty good.
Oh, yeah.
You know? And so he called.
I might have mentioned your name to Dave Perkins over the years a couple of times.
So he called
Wow.
and he asked, do you have anyone that you would recommend as a baseball columnist? I need to replace myself. And I was a PR guy. I was still full-on PR guy at the time. And so I recommended a few people, and then I recommended Mike Farber. And he said, we've already asked Mike Farber, and he's just going to stay with SI because his wife is French-Canadian. They live in Montreal. They have kids. And it turns out later that he was BSing me because Farber had recommended me as well. And he was just calling to gauge my interest without asking me.
Right.
Wait, Perkins was BSing you?
Yeah.
Perkins, by the way, been over twice. He came on with Bob Elliott once just to tell me stories. Good FOTM. So hello to Dave Perkins.
But so I took the train down and I interviewed at the Sky Dome for the job. And it was weird because I had never written anything anywhere other than game notes and press guides.
Right.
And but I knew I loved writing. I knew I could do it. And he said, we want 800 words of your opinion. And I said to Dave Van Horn, I said, I do that every night in a bar with you. And he said, if you ever come up dry and you can't think of anything to write, then just call early and we'll not have you in the paper. And it never happened in 24 years. So I'm proud of that. But that was the sequence of events. It took a while because the Paducah, Kentucky Times got internet before the Toronto Star did, and I was the butt of a lot of early jokes because I didn't have information that every podcaster and blogger had. But it turned, it settled down. It turned out.
Who was at the Star, Rich? Who was at the Star at the time when you joined? What year? What year were you talking? 95.
95. Yeah.
Right. So who was there?
Doing baseball.
Yeah.
Alan Ryan, Mark Zielinski, and there's been a succession of baseball writers that I've mentored and pushed out of the nest to do better. Cahal Kelly was there, Brendan Kennedy. There's a ton of Laura Armstrong.
I remember reading Alan Ryan in the Sunday Star, I think it was, and he always had a sports quiz every Sunday. This was for a number of years. I think it might have been in the 80s. I don't know when they discontinued. But it was like a 50-question weekend New York Times crossword, Sunday crossword kind of a thing, and it was fantastic. And whenever I'd see him in the press box, I'd always say, "Oh, it was a great quiz," or "A question," or I might have a little question for him, or something like that. That's what we always talked about. But all my any baseball fan, like you had to read the Star. Yeah, the Star's coverage was fantastic.
Well, that was like the height of their powers when you think about the circulation and how important newspapers were.
Man. When I joined the Star, it was the 7th largest circulation North American newspaper, which, when you consider the LA and New York markets and stuff like that was pretty good.
Amazing. I just had Monday night, I drank Great Lakes beer and kicked out jams of Ben Rayner. And, Ben, long time, he says he met you at a couple of Christmas parties now, here and there, Ben Rayner and Richard Griffin crossing paths. But, of course, they're not at 1 Yonge Street anymore. It's, in fact, even the nameplate's off one side of the building. I was actually biking by yesterday. It's still on some others. But 1 Yonge Street, no longer home to the Toronto Star. Ed Keenan's, they're in the Well or whatever it's called now in Spadina there. But I'm wondering, give us an idea, like how the newspaper game changed in your tenure there. Like from 95, we talk about the height of the powers. We know how many people they were sending to these World Series games, right? Now there's probably not that many people working for the paper now. Like in your time with the Star from 95 to 2019? Is that when you leave? 2019?
Beginning of 2019, yep.
Like what did you witness in terms of the power of the newspaper?
Yeah, when I got there, it was the production was done on the same floor in that building as the editorial stuff, and you were expected to go in 4 or 5 times a week, not just to file your expenses like it became, but
right.
And the thing to me was that the sports department and the paper itself were so proud of how much they covered in person. Like when I went on a road trip, I was expected to look at the NFL schedule, the NBA, whatever. And spring training, I'd go to golf tournaments and cover. And I went to Orlando to cover a Raptors game from Dunedin. And I went to Miami to cover a Raptors game from Dunedin.
Horse races. Don't forget horse races,
Yeah.
Rich. Horse races when you're down covering spring training.
Yeah.
Hey,
Shout out to Peter Gross.
But it was like, what can you cover for us? And I covered so many events that are memorable. Super Bowl in Phoenix in 1996, January 96, when they almost lost it because they wouldn't recognize Martin Luther King Day.
Right.
And it became a major political football, if you'll pardon that.
Pun intended.
But and like Diana Ross did the halftime show hanging out of a helicopter. It was like memorable stuff,
Right.
I covered NFL playoff games. I covered the one where Terrell Owens made the catch for the 49ers in the end zone. They rented me a convertible and it rained for 4 days, so they saw me coming, But that is a big difference. And at the end, and I think it was 20, and I covered every World Series. Like I went to 39 World Series in a row. And that ended in 2016 with that great World Series with the Cubs and the Indians. And 2017, they said there's no interest with Toronto fans, Toronto readers for the World Series. And I went, okay, this has really changed.
Yeah.
And then 2018, I was on the ground. I just landed in Florida for spring training, and they there was a conference call, and they said, there's no more travel in sports. Nobody's going to travel. And I had just landed in Florida. So I went to the ballpark, filed a column, filed the next day, filed for the next 40 days. Nobody told me to come home, so I didn't. But I could see the writing on the wall at that point. That's why when the opportunity to speak with Ross Atkins and take the job with the Blue Jays came along, that it wasn't that tough a decision.
Right. Now, I'm not going to get you to the Jays that quickly here, Richard, because I do want to dwell on a few things. In fact, I realize you come to Toronto in 1995. By the way, what did you think of the city off the hop there? Did you guys settle in without a problem, or was there any culture shock?
Well, when I was living in Jamaica, my mother's brother lived in Scarborough and still does, or still did. He passed away a few years ago. But his whole family is there. They had 9 kids. And they lived in Scarborough. So every second summer, we would fly up and spend 2 weeks with them. So I had been to the exhibition, I had been to all sorts of things. So it wasn't that much of a culture shock. It was for my kids who were all in having to transfer schools and stuff.
Right.
But for me and Debbie, it was not as difficult as it might seem.
Did you settle into Toronto proper or one of our fine suburbs?
Well, we went to Oakville because it was on its way. I figured it was, access to Pearson. I could get to Buffalo. I could get to Cleveland and Detroit. I could drive. And that's why we settled out west of the city. And it's worked out. I mean, it was a great community for 4 kids growing up. I coached baseball for 20 years. And it was an opportunity to spend more time with my kids. My 2 older kids didn't know who I was. They had to look in the paper. They had to look in the paper and see where the Expos were playing, and that's where I was because I did 156 games in Montreal every year. Right. So it worked out. Oakville was great. We were still there. The kids are all grown up and whatever. Pat, my youngest son, is scouting for the Blue Jays now.
Nice.
Okay, neat.
Yeah.
Okay,
so
cool.
it's worked out really well.
Are you still in the same house, or did you downsize once
No, we
the kids
downsized once the kids left. We were down on the lake shore where the servants used to live,
I was going to say you chose Oakville, which is smart because it makes it easier for you to visit the TMDS studio here in New Toronto and regale us with stories. Okay, what was the first World Series you attended live, Richard?
It was the Yankees and Dodgers in 1978. Yeah.
And how many World Series in a row did you attend live?
It was 39, and it wasn't the entire series because I was a volunteer PR person. I volunteered for everything that involved baseball because that's my life and that's what I loved. And so they were always looking for PR volunteers because once you get to the World Series, the Championship Series and the World Series, it becomes an MLB event. So they were looking for reliable, low budget,
economical,
reliable, low budget.
but they didn't count on my being the Pied Piper of beer gardens. I would take the young PR guys out, and we'd show up, and we'd get our work done. But we enjoyed the baseball, we enjoyed the travel, and 39 in a row is awesome.
That is awesome, and because so what I'm letting the listeners know is even though Richard Griffin doesn't come to Toronto and start working for the Star until 95, and he was working for the Expos in 92, 93, you were, of course, you witnessed these Blue Jays back-to-backs because you've been to, 39 World Series in a row. And I'm glad Hebsy's here because I'm going to play a little clip of the late, great Tom Cheek, and then you two are going to talk about this moment in Blue Jays history. Here we go.
Joe has had his moments. 2 balls and 2 strikes on it. Here's the pitch on the way. A swing and a belt. Left field. Way back. Blue Jays win it. The Blue Jays are World Series champions as Joe Carter hits a 3-run home run in the 9th inning, and the Blue Jays have repeated as World Series champions. Touch 'em all, Joe. You'll never hit a bigger home run in your life.
See, Richard, we have happier memories in Blue Jays land than they do in Expos land.
Yes. But 90, 92, 93 World Series and 94 could have been the third straight happiest memory. But I don't know, Hebsy. I was in the press box doing the in-game notes, and I was at a pause because there's no use in that inning of doing any notes. So I went and stood and watched from one of the entrance ways to the main press box, and Chris Wheeler, who was a long-time broadcaster for the Phillies, they weren't doing the radio because it was the World Series, but he was there. And he comes up to me and he goes, just like 2 seconds before the home run, he goes, "Griff, do you think we could borrow John Wetland for an inning?" And then the next pitch was boom, and he looks at
Wild
me.
thing.
To this day, when I see Chris Wheeler at spring training or whatever, because he does the broadcast or he does the PA at their spring training games in Clearwater, we shake our heads and go, "John Wetland, can we borrow John Wetland?"
That's a good line in that moment.
Yeah.
Because Mitch Williams, Wild Thing, yeah.
And that was like, Tom Cheek I did not know well because he had just done some Expos games, and that's where he was discovered by Dave Van Horn in Vermont, just hosting a winter caravan.
How friendly are you with Dave Van Horn?
I love Dave. He's one of my best friends in baseball.
Would Dave do Toronto Mic'd? I feel like we got to get Dave on Toronto Mic'd.
Yeah, he would.
Okay, we're going to talk afterwards. We're going to make that happen.
He was great.
And the thing about Tom Cheek is that as I began to write and he began to read my stuff, he appreciated that it wasn't 100% like rah-rah. Because even as a broadcaster, you have to be a little realistic about things, And so at spring training, I'd be there, and at that time, we always had two people covering, a columnist and a beat guy.
Yeah.
And he would look at me one day from a balcony, and he'd go like this. He'd waggle his hands, because I always had my golf clubs in the trunk. and I would go, "Okay," and I'd call the desk, and I'd go, "I got nothing today." And then we'd go play golf. And Tom and I became very good friends that way.
Oh, yeah, we lost him far too soon.
Golf,
So, Hebsy Man, remind us. I know that this has been covered on Toronto Mike, but for those who maybe didn't hear those episodes, although everyone should go into the archives, and every Hebsy appearance on Toronto Mike is gold. There's so many great stories. But remind us, where were you when Joe Carter touched them all? Like, specifically.
Okay, you know what? So 2 years in a row, I was not at the game where it was taking place, and happy because of it.
Okay.
At the time, I was a working journalist, reporter, anchor, whatever, right? And when the Jays were in the playoffs or when the Leafs were in the playoffs or whatever, I was I was on the road covering it, or some days I was anchoring, and maybe okay, you're going to go to this one. And so at that particular time, I was on the desk, but that night I wasn't. So both the 92 when Winfield in the 11th inning off Charlie Liebrandt,
right?
And they won in the 6th game there, and this one here that you just referenced, I was not in the building, and I was pretty drunk, stoned, both.
For some reason, I thought you were in the
giddy.
building. Okay.
No, not for either of those two.
Gotcha.
And I'm glad, because had I been in the building, it wouldn't have been as a fan. I would have had to be there as a reporter. And sometimes, when you're there all the time working, you'd like nothing more than to not be there. And just
right.
and you have to, and the other thing is you have to understand this is that for a number of years, I had to be more critical of the Blue Jays and the Leafs and the Raptors or whatever, because I want them to win. But I think people that listen to me,
right.
I'm not a homer in that
regard.
regard.
You're a journalist.
Well, I'd like to think so. That you're looking at both sides of it, right? You're not a blind follower or an extension.
No cheering in the press box.
Or an extension of the PR department of the team, which, many are and were back in the day, especially the writers.
Actually, that topic's going to come up
that's
again.
Just a whole other story.
As we get Richard into the PR
long story
job.
short here, if that's possible at this particular point, I wasn't in either one. I remember I was pretty either wasted or whatever, but for the few times as an adult, I could be a fan. And those were the two occasions where I really was a fan, where from the first time I saw them and loved baseball, I wanted them to win.
You could cheer.
And then like the next day or 2 days later, I had to be the, not unbiased, but the, it was great, but, next year I'm a little worried and I'm going to sign a free agent. There had to be that kind of thing like that. So I remember just being giddy and not having to worry about being a professional broadcaster, I guess.
Mike, I got... Before you go on, if you've got time,
of course,
I've got a great story about the '92 World Series.
Okay, let me set it up then. I want to hear that story, but let's play a little bit of this.
With a tying run at third and 2 down in the bottom of the 11th, 4-3 Blue Jays.
John Smoltz, the pinch runner at third. Timlin. Nixon bunts. Timlin on it. Throws to first. For the first time in history, the World Championship banner will fly north of the border. The Toronto Blue Jays are baseball's best in 1992.
Right, talk to me about 92.
Why don't you have the
I
Tom
know.
Cheek call? Why would you have the CBS? Because we were the first time north of
I
the
thought
border.
I'd mix it up. I thought I'd mix it
Oh
up.
no, man!
Yeah, Otis Nixon. Otis
What?
Nixon was a good friend of mine from Montreal, and
Right.
he played in Toronto also. It might have been after. It was after.
It was.
but
Yeah.
Yes.
He had some good years in Montreal.
he had some great years in Montreal.
could
Was an
steal a base,
impact
man.
player, and I asked him after. I said, like, what were you thinking? You know,
Right, right.
Honestly,
What did he say?
He said he thought he could beat it
He's
out.
fast,
you know?
yeah.
But the story that I had from '92 was Game 1 with Mike Swanson, who was the Padres PR guy at the time, and we did the game notes together. So I finished the pregame notes and went downstairs where the PR room was, where you could get a sandwich and then come back upstairs for the game. And as we're coming back from getting a sandwich, I'm looking and I go, "Hey, Swanee, they're flying our flag upside down."
Right.
And he goes, "Are you going to say anything?" I said, "Nah, they'll figure it out." So I went upstairs for the
That's
anthems,
funny.
and I stood next to Howie Starkman because I wasn't sure that they would figure it out.
Right.
But when they unfurled the flag, the color guard, I just elbowed Howie. I said, "Howie, look."
Hey, Howie.
And I didn't tell him that I could have prevented it.
You could have
but
changed
in
history.
hindsight,
You could have
I'm
said
probably
something, Rich.
But my way of making up for it is for Game 3 when we came back to play in Toronto, I picked up an almanac and I did a note on all the flags that could be flown upside down and nobody would notice.
Like Japan, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Japan was at the top
That's
of
the
list.
best one. Yeah.
But that sort of helped diffuse the vitriol and the animosity
Right, for
towards yeah. So I was trying to make up for it, but I think I could have done a better job by
That's
just
funny.
telling them, hey.
But as a journalist, you
Hey,
don't want
Captain.
to affect history, right? You got to
You
sort of
might wanna,
observe.
yeah,
You gotta,
Yeah, I was still a PR
might
guy
wanna
at the
let it
time.
happen.
That's right. That's right. PR
It's like
guy.
the guy who left the lens cap on the camera. Are you going to say something to the guy, or are you going to sort of see kind of what happens? Like, oh, let's just see what happens there.
Okay, now we have Blue Jays PR man Richard Griffin here. So now you leave the Toronto Star for the. But that was a difficult decision, I would imagine, right? To leave the Star for the Blue Jays. In 2019.
Yeah, it was difficult, especially in the timing because, they were trying to get rid of the older writers. It was a time where they were sort of trying to save money,
Sure.
basically.
Say it.
And so I was right between packages that they were offering, so there was no package out there for me. But I decided I needed to go anyway because the season was going to start in like 3 or 4 weeks. And so I ended up with, not as great a package as if I had decided to go 3 months earlier.
Right.
But I had nothing lined up 3 months earlier. That's the only problem. And as you guys found out today, I'm not done yet. So
Right. You're not done yet. I want to let people know you were the third Toronto Star sports writer to win the Jack Graney Award. You joined Neil McCarl and Milt Dunnell, and they won in 87 and 88.
But the only one who also has the Robert Official Award in Cooperstown.
Oh, to say that. Okay.
The
wow.
Jack Graney Award. Now, you know what that is, right? You know who Jack Graney was, Mike?
Remind me.
He was the
I'm trying to
first
remember.
baseball player, really the first, to go to the broadcast booth, from the field to the broadcast booth. He was very, very good with Cleveland. Back when radio kind of like
Jack
first
Graney.
started, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now I know. Now I
From
know.
London, Ontario. So the Jack Graney Award is a media award given out by the Canadian Baseball Hall of
Yeah,
Fame.
I think
Very-
he just won an award at Cooperstown this
That's
year.
right, he did. Yeah.
Wow.
For broadcast.
For broadcast. The Ford Frick, part of the Ford Frick Award, is that
Yeah.
it? Yeah.
Okay, amazing. Now I'm
I don't
going.
think there's any tapes of him either. There's no, because if you could find some
Jack Graney.
grainy audio from
Grainy
Jack,
audio,
you're from
right?
Cleveland,
Literally.
right?
Yeah,
You know.
I like that. Okay, so now that we have Richard Griffin with the Blue Jays here, I've got questions from listeners, some excited listeners. Mike Lynch. Actually, before I get to Mike Lynch, my apologies. Brad Hoffman writes in, I just saw you're interviewing Richard Griffin. I'd love to know if it was a tough adjustment for him the first year he stopped writing and got the Jays gig, specifically with players like Marcus Stroman. If I'm not mistaken, he was one of many reporters who Stroman blocked on Twitter. So I wonder how he handled having to basically work with him once he got the Jays PR job. I guess if he doesn't want to specifically address Stroman, don't worry, I'm going to make him. That's Mike talking. I would still be interested to learn about the adjustment in general and when it comes to writing about the players 1 year and then having to work with many of the same players the next year. And before you get to that, Mike Lynch did say, I've really missed his articles in the Star since he left to be a Blue Jay. Give us what we all want to hear. The juicy details on the Stroman exit at the trade deadline in 2019. So I turn it over to you, Richard. You got Brad and Mike and many, many others who had questions about Stroman. What say you?
Well, that was one of the things that surprised me when they hired me, is that Stroman was still there, and I knew that Ross Atkins would have trouble with that within the clubhouse, and apparently he did. I mean, Stroman was not happy. Wouldn't talk to me that first spring training. He would do things, but only if somebody else asked him to do things. But that stemmed back to, like you said, he blocked me as a writer.
Why did he block you?
I think I said that after a quick May start, I forget what year it was, he was like 5-1 by the middle of May. And I wrote a column saying, oh, it's a little early to call him an ace. He's not an ace yet. He's, like I said, given the history, there have been a lot of guys with quick starts. Roy Halladay has a history of being an ace until he gets to that. And then, like, he confronted me in the clubhouse, and Josh Donaldson did a play-by-play in front of all the laughing writers and players. And Donaldson did a play-by-play of our argument until Stroman said, what, I can't be an ace because I'm not 6'7" and white? And I said, that's enough.
Whoa.
Yeah, I said, that's enough. You're done. And I walked away. Yeah. And that was the last time, basically, that we spoke until, he said, I was good to you. I was good to your son. I talked to your son. My son was in college. Like, it's not like he went up to a 4-year-old and signed something for him and whatever. But the time with when Stroh got named to the All-Star team in 2019, he did come over and spontaneously give me a hug.
Okay. Right. Okay.
That was really nice. That was key. Mm-hmm. But then when he got traded, what happened behind closed doors will remain behind closed doors. But, because media is still, like, Major League Baseball called and said, hey, you can't do that. I said, we did that. They said, well, we got a complaint from the writers. I said, great. I said, slap me on the wrist. That's fine. And they did. And it was over. But, it wasn't pretty. He walked out. The writers had a chance to stop him. They didn't. So it's not my fault, which is a far cry from being a writer to being a PR guy, and the attitude that I've shown on both sides. You really have to. It's the same game. It's a different angle that you're approaching it from. But, guys like Kevin Pillar at spring training in 2019 took me aside and walked with me and said how important I was going to be. Nice. And so it was good. It worked out well until COVID hit in March of 2020.
If there was Twitter around when Hebsy was at Sportsline, he would have been blocked by many a Blue Jay.
For sure.
And thank goodness Steve didn't have Twitter.
No, that's not true at all. Okay. See, the thing is that I think like with anything else, there has to be mutual respect.
Sure.
If the guy looks at you and says, this guy doesn't know anything about baseball, what does he know about baseball? That's one level. Number 2 level is he never played the game. So even if he knows baseball, how much could he know if he never played? And 3 is he never played at this level. So there's sort of that, they'll look, and you have to be able to prove to them. I remember going up to Blue Jays coach, John Sullivan, and giving him trivia questions, and he didn't know the answer, right? He'd say, how do you know that? You're from Canada. That type of
that mentality
early on.
Back
so
then,
you gotta show them that you know your stuff, you know the game, and at that particular point, depending on who the guy is, you'll get that grudging respect, and then that way you can have a relationship.
Just to follow up on that spring training of 2019, the first spring training that I was back in PR, I got to give credit to Ross because he did stand up and talk to Stroman, talk to the players. And then there was a funny story when I went up at the initial players meeting with the staff, and everyone gives their little spiel. The medical department says what they can do for you and what not to do. And then they introduced, Shelley Duncan was a coach, and he introduced me. And as I was walking up the aisle, he goes, Griff, I don't know how they ever hired you. I don't know why they ever hired you. And all the players are starting to laugh. He goes, I think it's so you wouldn't write about him.
Which is smart.
That's good.
All right, now Steve Cole, who I met at TMLX 11. I met his wife as well. I think she's got a photo with you.
I got pictures taken with him.
Love it. He's a big fan of the program.
He came over to me and
loves
asked
Hebscher
if I
on
would
sports
take a
too.
picture.
Right. They love Hebscher. They love Toronto Mike.
I could have charged them like all the.
How much would you charge for that?
Probably $25, and for a signature,
I do it for 10. Holy smokes! Okay.
Oh, do you?
No, I don't. I'm just goofing.
But it's funny because it's like because it used to be that before we had camera phones, you would go and say, "Can I get your autograph on a piece of paper?"
Unless
whatever.
you're John Gallagher, but yes.
What's that?
John Gallagher always had a disposable camera with him, like since the 80s or whatever. So anytime somebody passes away or something, John Gallagher's got these selfies with them, but they're from like the 80s. It's because he had the disposable camera.
So he waits for someone to die and then he posts a picture of that, but he doesn't post a picture of them while they're alive.
Well, if something happens in the news, he will, but typically he waits
I took
till
a picture
they
with
die.
them back in 1984.
By the way, John Gallagher, you don't have any John Gallagher stories for me, do you, Richard Griffin?
I do, but I can't tell.
I heard from him for the first time in a while 2 days ago. He was Googling Brian Henderson because he was good friends of Brian Henny. And he came to a Toronto Mike article where I got a great note from Henny where he talked about update on his life and everything. And John Gallagher just wrote me this really sweet note from Halifax or somewhere in Nova Scotia where he was reading it and thinking about me. I used to produce a show he had with Peter Gross called Gallagher and Gross Save the World. And it was a really nice little note from John Gallagher. He might be missing the big smoke from his new home there. Okay, enough. Great John Gallagher. And John Gallagher, big Montreal fan himself.
Yeah, for sure. I've dealt with him, and he was at the first couple of spring trainings I was at. He would always rent a Mustang convertible and just cruise around all hours of the day and night, and he'd always have like 3 or 4 women in the car with him.
That's John Gallagher, absolutely. John Gallagher.
Did I tell you about the time he got kicked out of Maple Leaf Gardens? He shows up. He's got no socks and shoes. He does it right. It's like the spring or whatever. He's got no.
Did he get an usher fired or something?
Yeah, but he's got no shoes on, and he's got one of those big plastic tumblers. Right, it's not a clear tumbler.
He doesn't leave
so you
home
don't know
without
what's inside of it,
Right.
and there's ice is clicking in it, and you can smell it.
But he's been open about this.
And he's gonna walk through the Wood Street gates like he normally would because he's got a press pass and everyone knows
and he's
who he
John
is.
Gallagher.
And John Gallagher, he's got this big, and he's got no socks and shoes on.
Yeah.
And one of the guys stops him, and he goes, I with a bread box, that kind of thing.
I love the man.
I'm watching this going, oh, man. And then the next morning he's on Q107 and he's fabulous like nothing ever happened.
Of course.
Anyway.
We call them functional. Anyway, Steve Cole. He has an alternative Twitter account called Expos in the Wild. It's at Expos Wild, which is strictly random photos of people he runs across wearing Expos gear. And he's happy to say it's got Hebscher and Richard Griffin on his feed over the years. Okay, this leads to his question. Do you think... both of you, but we'll start with Richard. Do you think Major League Baseball will ever return to Montreal?
I think that at one point, when I spoke to John McHale Jr. during the exhibition games, when 100,000 people were going to 2 exhibition games in Montreal, John McHale was very confident and very positive that something could happen. But when they got to the idea of splitting a season between Tampa and Montreal, I started to doubt.
Right.
And then when expansion, you realize that expansion teams are going to be over $1 billion.
Yeah.
The game is healthy. The game is making a lot of money for teams, but that initial outlay, and they didn't want to franchise an existing franchise, transferring, which would have been great for Tampa Bay to completely move to Montreal, and ownership was there, and those guys had enough money to support a transferred team and to start it up and to build a stadium. But once it became an expansion thing and they showed less interest, I've not given up on it, but I've become more negative on it ever happening again.
Hebsy, do you think MLB ever returns to Montreal?
Nah, I wish I could say yes, but I think over the years I've noticed that a lot of people that had the clout and the finances to take on an ownership role in Montreal, few of them have decided that they would rather be part of ownership groups of other professional sports teams, not in Montreal, for example, right?
Right.
And so you got to have local people. You got to have the help of government, and there's just so many layers to it. You got to have the stadium, all that stuff. And unfortunately, like Rich said before, it's been many years since there was a team in Montreal. And the more years you go without having a team, the less likely it is that you're going to be able to revitalize it. Because the children of the fans of the Montreal Expos are not going to be nearly as enthusiastic. Let's get a team back in Montreal.
Right.
So, and let's face it, the Canadian dollar, man, that was a huge, massive factor.
I think one of the factors that's underrated is the animosity of Bud Selig when he was commissioner towards John McHale, who helped move the Braves from Milwaukee to Atlanta.
Out of his town,
And he never came out and said it, but that Montreal franchise was not one of his favorites because John McHale was there. And so there was a lot of wasted years in terms of running that franchise into the ground between the strike in 94
Terrible.
and 2004 when they tried to contract the team in 2002 along with the Minnesota Twins, and the Minnesota fan base and government wouldn't allow it, so that they couldn't just do Montreal. And then it became such a scam with Loria buying the team so that he could go eventually to Florida and John Henry could go to Boston.
Terrible.
It was like, and
what
then
about those Puerto
the only
Rico
way,
years, the Puerto Rico years.
the only way to do that is for MLB to buy the franchise and not give a rat's ass about it and run it into the ground so that North America thinks Montreal is not capable of supporting a major league team. When if somebody told you that Great Lakes Brewery didn't like this batch of beer, so and then tried to sell it as a product that you should have in your fridge, that's not going to work either. So, but Great Lakes Brewery would never say that because every batch of beer is the same quality and the best.
Don't think
and they have good quality control over there.
Yeah.
Shout out to Mike Lackey, the chief brewer. Okay. Richard, though, and this is specific for you now from the same Steve Cole who has another one after this. This guy was really excited you're coming on, and as many are, actually. Thank you for doing this, by the way. This has been amazing. Although the Jays front office would publicly say all the right things, again, this is actually Steve Cole talking, everybody, but although the Jays front office would publicly say all the right things and likely support Montreal publicly, what do you think their actual private position behind closed door would be on Montreal expansion? That's not a loaded question at all, Richard. Let's go.
No, I agree with that. I don't think that it's as enthusiastic as it might have been previously. I mean, the Blue Jays are in a good place as Canada's national team. I mean, from the time that I left the Expos until now, Quebec has come a long way in terms of supporting the Blue Jays. It helps when Vlad Jr. homers to win a game.
Montreal-born Vlad Jr., son of the great Expo.
But I think privately, and, it's not anything that we would have discussed in my role with the Blue Jays, but just the idea I have of what they would think of it now, I'm sure that they wouldn't be enthusiastically supporting a bid.
Very interesting. Okay, now that you've been warmed up here, time for real talk. A couple of months ago, or a number of months ago, this is from Steve again, Shannon Curley was the subject of a big Sportsnet feature. She was portrayed as one of the Jays' secret recruiting weapons and a crucial member of the staff with respect to player relations. A few months after that big splash, we learned that she suddenly disappeared and is no longer with the club. Time for real talk. Was she lured away elsewhere? Did her big publicity splash cause the knives to come out? Well, was she on the ropes and participating in the big feature in an attempt to save her job? Was she okay? In other words, what happened to Shannon Curley?
I think it was a personal decision. I haven't spoken to Shannon since she left. She was a huge part of what was going on in the clubhouse. And, in terms of recruitment, she was on every conference call with a free agent and made a great impression because of the care and the care that the Blue Jays have taken of families and players goes all the way back to day one. And it's nothing new, but Shannon became the face of that. And there are players who will say that, my wife was on the conference call. I was on the conference call.
Right.
We spoke to Ross. We spoke to Mark Shapiro. And Shannon Curley convinced us that this organization really cares about players and their families. And it's the truth. But it's not anything new. It's not anything that started with Shannon. She was a big part of it. I'm sure they're going to try and continue it. But she was in every recruiting video that was sent out to agencies and free agents, and I don't think there's anything underhanded or nefarious or to be looked at. I think it's a personal decision, so there's no Game of Thrones or whatever type thing.
No knives are out.
Yeah, right.
That's that was the name of the mystery film there with James Bond there doing his
it was pretty good. We watched it as a family. It was great.
And then, have you seen the new one?
Daniel Craig?
Yeah, Daniel Craig. That's the name I'm looking for. But they have a new one. Have you seen it yet? That takes place, and I want to say, where is that? Hawaii? But there's a new one that just came out.
I saw it promoted on the Golden Globes, but I
Glass
didn't,
Onion. That's the name I'm looking for. Glass Onion. Okay. I want to shout out an FOTM who helped me buy these microphones and set up this studio when I decided I should be a podcaster, because maybe one day I'll get a PR pass for the Blue Jays from Richard Griffin. Then I forgot to ask for one. But okay. Setting up this studio, I was assisted by a guy named Andrew Stokely. Andrew Stokely does the audio for Sportsnet presentations of Blue Jay games at the Dome. He's a good guy. Listeners of the program know him. And Stokely just wrote in when he heard you were coming on. He said, "Richard is great. It'll be weird not seeing him daily at the Dome or on the road." So Andrew's going to miss you.
That's much appreciated, but I'm trying not to go too far, as we've already discussed.
Right, as discussed. That'll be the big when you're ready to make the big announcement on the next move, you come back here. So final moments here. I've loved this. Hebsy, how was this episode? What do you think?
Oh, fantastic. We didn't get into enough baseball, though.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Deep baseball.
Unless
stuff.
Richard has to go, in this last 5 to 10 minutes, this is your chance to ask any
This
questions.
is a profile. It's his first time on, so you can't cram everything into it, right?
Well, one thing that I'd like to clear up is that I'm not like a dinosaur who doesn't believe in any statistics or anything like that.
Analytics?
I did in the early 90s predict that the nerds would take over the game, that somebody would win 5 fantasy leagues in a row and then become a general manager because they think they're smarter than everybody else. But the factor that doesn't go into that is that these are all human beings you're dealing with, not just numbers.
Right.
And when I started with the Expos in 73, I had my own scoring system, no computers, but I had my own scoring system. And before I started traveling, I'd score every game, every pitch off radio with Dave Van Horn. And home games I'd score. And I became Jim Fanning, the GM. I became his arbitration guru. So I was producing stats, specialized stats, long before anyone else. So I get insulted personally when people assault me and compare me to, I won't say Bob Elliott, but to dinosaurs of the game who don't believe in that stuff. Because I was one of the early ones, but I just wanted to clear that up.
No, I'm glad. This is your chance. Everybody's listening. This is your chance. Hebsy, anything that you were thinking on your drive here for Hebsy on Sports, you're thinking, I want to make sure I ask Richard about this guy or this moment or anything time you're training that swamp?
No, not really. No, I always enjoyed Rich's work, and but I have to expound on what he was saying there. If you see the player play and see the situations, right? And then look at the stats and go, 6 for 10, but 2 of those were bullets that were hit right at the right fielder. And now with no shift taking place, et cetera, and the game being different.
Right.
So it's much different to put stats together, much of it based on what you actually saw with your own eyes, right, and can quantify, versus someone that just, a naked stat, like in his last 11 games, or just some number somewhere that somebody can easily pull out. I used to say this. I used to know more about baseball than 99.9% of the people, right? Because I read and I did stats and I took as much in as I possibly could, observed. And now I know, now 99% of the people who like baseball know more than me.
And another point there, Hebsy, is that every year when I vote for the Hall of Fame, I've seen all of those players play. Every single one for the last 10 years, I've seen them in person play. So I have an opinion that goes beyond just WAR and F WAR and O WAR and P WAR or whatever it is. And that makes a difference.
Huge difference.
Carlos Delgado, should he be in the Hall of Fame?
I was surprised that he didn't last on the ballot more than a year. I voted for him. But my theory on that is by the time he got to New York and played with the Mets, and like the Hall of Fame, the annual awards, there's only 2 voters from every city, so it's fair. But all the retired writers that have a Hall of Fame vote are in the New York area. A lot of them are in the New York area. They saw Carlos Delgado at the tail end of his career, and he was not a Hall of Fame player at that point. But from what I saw in Toronto, and when he went to Florida, he's definitely a Hall of Fame player.
Richard Griffin, no longer the Blue Jays director of baseball media, but now an FOTM, which is even better. And you get beer and you get pasta. And I got to shout out very quickly Sammy Cohn Real Estate, because if you have any real estate questions, Sammy Cohn's your guy. And as Hebsy knows, because he's longtime friends with Jake Gold, former manager of the Watchmen, Sammy Cohn is a hell of a drummer, right, Hebsy? That man can drum. Okay.
Absolutely. If he's anywhere near as good a real estate guy as he is a drummer, man, he's going to have a fantastically successful career, and you should call him.
Top 1% of realtors in Toronto. So it is sammy.cohn@properlyhomes.ca. Thank you, Richard Griffin. We're going to get a photo afterwards, so don't speed away, and I got to get you your Great Lakes beer and your lasagna. But I loved this. Thanks for making the visit, buddy.
Thanks for inviting me for the 12th time, Mike.
I know, yeah. On that note, what took so long? You couldn't do this when you were at the Blue Jays? You had to wait till you were independent?
He's busy. I tried to get 5 golf games in with the guy.
He's right.
Nothing.
I think I've been asking for a decade.
I told you last year at spring training, Mike, I couldn't even get in to see him. Okay?
Yeah, you're right.
Couldn't get an audience with the man.
I'm the one who asked for Hebsy to be here, too. So
you're the one who can blame.
That.
If you didn't like Hebsy on this program, it's Richard's fault. That's what we're telling you. But that brings us to the end of our 1,187th show. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm at Toronto Mike. Richard Griffin, remind me what your Twitter handle is. R Griffin?
What is it now, Rich?
At R Griff Baseball.
At R Griffin Baseball.
No, not Griffin.
Oh, just Griff. R Griff Baseball. Now that we're friends, I can call you Griff?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's Griff. All right.
Can I call you Mike?
Yeah, of course. Right. But Toronto Mike, of course. Hebsy Man is at Hebsy Man on Twitter. He's a great follow as well. Our friends at Great Lakes Brewery are at Great Lakes Beer. Palma Pasta is at Palma Pasta. Recycle My Electronics are at EPRA_Canada. Ridley Funeral Home are at Ridley FH. Canna Cabana are at Canna Cabana _. And Sammy Cohn Real Estate is at Sammy Cohn. It's KOHN, by the way, for Cohn. It's not like David Cohn. See you all next week when my special guest is Gord Miller.
Yeah, the wind is cold, but the smell of snow warms me today. And your smile is fine, and it's just like mine, and it won't go away. 'Cause everything is rosy and gray. Well, I've kissed you in France, and I've kissed you in Spain. And I've kissed you in places I better not name. And I've seen the sun go down on Sacré-Cœur. But I